Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking a case that has probably driven you a little crazy at some point, a digital mystery that plays out right on your very own computer.
You know the moment. You get a brand new hard drive. You plug it in, you check the storage, and it looks like a huge chunk of the space you just paid for has vanished into thin air. But hold on. Before you go writing that angry review, you should know this. The space isn't actually gone. It's not a defect, and nope, it is not a scam. To understand where those missing gigabytes went, we've got to go back, way back, all the way to the very beginning, to the fundamental building block of all digital information. So let's meet the main character in our story, the humble Byte. And believe me, its history is a lot more complicated and a lot more important than you might think. The easiest way to think of a byte is like the basic alphabet for a computer. A long time ago, 1 byte was simply the number of bits you needed to store just one character of text. Now, while the size used to vary, today we've all pretty much agreed on a universal standard. 1 byte equals 8 bits. But it wasn't always that simple. In the early days of computing, the size of a byte was totally up for debate. It completely depended on the hardware and could be anything from 1 bit all the way up to 48 bits. It was really the rise of huge commercial systems like the IBM System /360 that pushed the whole industry to adopt the 8-bit byte as the standard we all know and use today. And what about that weird name, Byte? Well, its creator, a guy named Werner Buchholz, came up with that unique spelling for a very, very practical reason. Yep, it was just a simple, clever spelling change to make sure no one would accidentally confuse it with its smaller cousin, the bit. Okay. So we have our basic unit of measurement. But this is where our mystery really starts, because it all comes down to how we count them. This right here, this is where all that confusion comes from. And it's all because of a fundamental clash between two totally different ways of counting. So on one side, you have the people who make and sell hard drives. They use the decimal system. That's powers of 10, the same system we use for pretty much everything else. For them, 1 kilobyte is a nice, clean 1,000 bytes. Simple. But on the other side, you have the computers themselves, and they think in binary, powers of 2. So to a computer, a kilobyte has always meant 2 to the power of 10, which is 1,024 bytes. And here's the crazy part. That seemingly tiny difference of 24 bytes, it starts to snowball, and I mean it really snowballs. At the kilobyte level, the difference is just over 2%. Not a big deal. But by the time you get all the way up to a terabyte, that little discrepancy has exploded to nearly 10%. And this chart just makes it so obvious, doesn't it? You can literally see that gap between the marketing number on the box and the number your computer reports just get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's growing exponentially every time we move up a level in storage. So here's the big reveal. No data is actually missing. Your 1 terabyte drive really does contain 1 trillion bytes, just like it says on the box. But when an operating system that thinks in binary, like Windows, measures that space, its math works out to 931 of what it considers a gigabyte. The amount of space is identical. It's just being measured with 2 completely different rulers. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so it's a weird math problem, who cares? Well, it turns out this little discrepancy has had some pretty big real-world consequences for decades. The fallout from this has been, well, messy. It's caused a ton of confusion for consumers and has even led to class action lawsuits against some of the biggest names in storage. People even tried to fix it by inventing new, super accurate terms like kibibyte and kibibyte for the binary measurements, but let's be real, they never caught on. And to make it all even more confusing, our operating systems can't even agree on which ruler to use. Apple and Ubuntu now show you the marketer-friendly decimal number, but Windows still sticks to the traditional binary way of doing things. So what happened with all those lawsuits? Well, in the end, the courts have generally sided with the manufacturers. For the purposes of trade and commerce in the US, 1 gigabyte is now legally defined as 1 billion bytes, period. That pretty much solidified the manufacturer's position. So here's the big takeaway. You are not being shortchanged on your storage. You're just stuck in the middle of a really old argument between easy marketing and the hard math of how computers actually work. The amount of physical space is exactly the same. The real question is, who gets to decide how we measure it? The company that sells it or the computer that has to use it?